Brainspotting is a brain-based psychotherapy approach that uses the field of vision to find where a person is holding not just the trauma, but any negative experience in their brain. We say with Brainspotting that where you look affects how you feel, because literally, when we look in different places, we feel differently. If a person is thinking about a problem and they look to their right or look to the left or up or down, literally one spot they're going to feel more activation, another spot they'll feel less. Where they feel more activation, if they look at the exact pinpoint area where they feel it the most and observe what goes on inside, we call it their processing. The brain first will find where it's held in the system, and then will start to resolve it or unwind it until it really gets to a point of resolution. A brain spot is a point in your field of vision that correlates to where you hold whatever problem you have that brings you for therapy. It correlates where you're holding it in your brain. So literally, when you're looking out at that spot, you're also looking in at that spot in your brain. I was working with an ice skater, and I was using a technique that used slow eye movements, and she was blocked on one particular jump, the triple loop, and she had mastered everything else, but this was the last piece that we weren't able to work through. As I slowly did the eye movements, as I got over here, her eyes started to wobble profoundly and then just froze. When that happened, literally I felt like somebody grabbed my hand and I just held it in place. For the next 10 minutes, a torrent of material came out from her. This was traumas that we hadn't gotten to in a year of intensive work, other negative experiences. But what was even more interesting was that things that we had fully worked through came up again and processed through to a deeper level. I had a sense when this happened that I had stumbled onto something profound. So when I started to try it out with other clients, using the slow eye movements, just looking for those eye freezes and eye wobbles and so on, anytime I saw it, I held my fingers in place and I had them look there. And a similar thing happened where they went into a deeper processing that just seemed to go on and carry things through to a point that hadn't happened before. I started to also show some of my other friends who are therapists. They started to try it with their clients, and over the course of the next 2 to 4 weeks, from what I was observing and what they were telling me, I could see that something was happening that hadn't happened before. Because brain spotting has to do with the brain and the body, the nervous system. Any psychological issue, and really certain physical issues, brain spotting can be used with. Trauma, traumatic experiences would be the most clear and obvious one, but issues of anxiety, depression, relational problems, functioning problems are all responsive to brain spotting. We also use brain spotting with certain physical conditions such as pain and other things like that. So then we use brain spotting with everybody for one simple reason. Brain spotting has many different techniques that can be used differently and shaped for each person. So because brain spotting is not just one approach, but a variety of approaches, and also brain spotting can be integrated with other therapy approaches, it can be modified to work with anybody. Well, when I mentioned eye movement, I was actually talking about what I was doing when I discovered brain spotting. But when I discovered brain spotting, what revealed itself was eye position and eye fixation. So although I was doing these slow eye movements, when I saw that eye wobble and that eye freeze, okay, I held it right in place. Brain spotting is based on eye fixation, and it's based on focus. Okay, EMDR is based on eye movement. Eye fixation is very precise. Okay, it's almost like a laser. Eye movement it's kind of like a power tool, but it's not precise at all because you really don't know how far to go, how fast to go, how long to go. Brain spotting, we know exactly how to go because the client is staring at that spot and it goes from there wherever it goes, and we just follow them wherever they go. There are some other differences as well, which is that the EMDR model has a lot of protocols and procedures as far as, well, you do this in this circumstance and that in that circumstance. Brain spotting, although we have a structure, is a much more open model because what we're doing with brain spotting, with all the different brain spotting tools, is that we're tracking the client and we're choosing which type of brain spotting to use with them at which time and which combination. So it's a much more open, flexible model. There are parallels, okay? The brain states that people go into while they're receiving brain spotting is similar to brain states that people go into under hypnosis. The difference is that in hypnosis, the hypnotherapist has to talk to the person and talk them into the trance state or into the hypnotic state. With brain spotting, when a person goes into a similar state, we don't talk them into it. Their brain actually creates the hypnotic state inside of themselves. So it's the perfect trance state for that moment and for that circumstance. So there is a similarity, but the profound difference is that we don't guide a person from the outside. We frame a situation for the person so they go there on their own. Our survival instincts come from the deepest parts of our brain and drive us to be able to not only survive, but be able to cope with things in our environment. In this context, the true answers come from deep in the brain. And when you hold things for a person in the way that they get access to it, things work the way they can work best. Well, I tend to be an innovator. And whenever I'm working with people, sort of in a creative way, different things come to me, like, what if I tried this or what if I tried that? So I'm trying out new techniques all the time. So for me, most of these techniques become interesting or they help a certain person at a certain time. But with brain spotting, I had a sense that this was a much larger breakthrough, that this was something that could help a lot of people a lot of the time. So what I did is I started to try it out with different clients I had been doing EMDR with or other approaches, to see if they responded in a different way, perhaps in a deeper, more powerful way. And by doing this, and also with the other people I trained, many of them were EMDR therapists, so what they saw was that something about this really found where the person was holding it and went deeper and deeper and deeper into it. Some clients said literally, this feels different. Okay, some said I can feel it all the way in the back of my head. Some said the processing is different. Okay, the most important feedback we get is from our clients, and when we listen carefully to what they have to say, what they tell us, we find out what is and what isn't. We find out what's similar and what's different, and sometimes what's significantly different. Well, first of all, different people have different histories, different conditions. If a person has a single event trauma, it actually can be processed through pretty quickly in a few sessions. If somebody has a lifetime of trauma going back to child abuse in childhood, I mean, that can take many months, even many years. But in that time period, the work is much more focused and efficient, and it's going right into the brain and into the body where the person is holding it. The brain has 1 quadrillion connections. That's 1 billion multiplied by 1 million. That's almost infinite as far as we know. The reason the brain has these massive amount of connections is because it needs to be scanning the entire body and the brain itself down to a cellular level, perhaps down to a molecular level. Okay? This massive, incredibly subtle scanning mechanism, when you harness it, when you turn it on itself, can find what's wrong and can resolve it, which is really what it's there for. when somebody comes for therapy that they have a problem that they couldn't work through, it's because somehow their brain couldn't find it or couldn't resolve it, as it does most other things. So again, with brain spotting, when we find that spot, it helps their brain to do what it's meant to do, which is to find it, figure it out, and release it. Brain spotting can be very powerful for certain people. Sometimes after a session, a person will feel very mentally or even physically fatigued. Sometimes the processing will continue on for the next few hours, even for a day or so. So you might call those side effects. But in actuality, because doing brain spotting can be like running a mental marathon, that fatigue is a natural outgrowth of the process. Also, the processing that continues after sessions means that the person's brain and body is still working on it and working it through on its own. So that's primarily a positive thing instead of a negative thing. It's not just that brain spotting is different, it's that we approach it differently. We look at athletes who have performance problems, especially the most powerful ones, which are really called loss of function or the yips. We look at them as having a trauma background. Okay? Most sports psychologists don't take a history and certainly don't take a trauma history. What we look for specifically are what we call the sports traumas. The sports traumas are comprised of sports injuries and of sports failures and humiliations. Most athletes started when they were very young, so the issues of sports injuries and sports failures starts young and gets repeated over and over again. These are traumatic to the athlete, and the sports injuries are physically and emotionally traumatic to the athlete, and they collect over time. So before we even get to the application of brain spotting, the conceptualization of the way we look at and understand what gets in the way of an athlete's performance is very, very different. But when you understand that the athletes are carrying these traumas in their brains and their bodies, we then apply brain spotting to find it, and it helps to resolve the block, to lower the anxiety, and the natural capacity to perform and to perform freely without overthinking and without inhibition just comes back to the athlete on their own. Brain spotting is meant to be used in all kinds of different ways. Brain spotting is an open creative tool, so it can be applied to a group of people as well as an individual. In sports, in working with a team, it's best to work with the individuals first and then to work with the team together. Because when you work with the individuals first, you're able to clear through their individual issues and traumas and blocks. Then when you get the team together, you now have a more open kind of situation, and you can work with the collective issues that the team has. But we don't just go for clearing out the traumas and the blocks. We look for what we call expansion, which then becomes the opportunity to go over and above where you were even before you had the block or the performance anxiety. I'll take the question in terms of both acting, singing, dancing, but also public speaking, which is similar but different. Performance anxiety, stage fright is much more commonplace for stage performers or people in front of the camera also, but particularly stage performers than anybody realizes. Sir Laurence Olivier, probably known as the greatest actor of our time, used to say to the stagehands when he came off stage, "Fooled him again." Okay? He had tremendous performance anxiety, stage fright. And there are actors and actresses that you'll see in film and on stage that you think are totally comfortable and confident, that really are carrying this intense fear and negative thoughts about their own performance. Again, this is like the athlete who loses the ability to throw or loses confidence at the plate. It's a very, very similar thing because it's a performance that has to be done in front of other people, and there are expectations of how a person is going to do. Okay? That takes whatever it is that you're struggling with and just amplifies it dramatically. So what we do is we work both with the causative factors, and we take a history and we really look, when did the stage fright begin, when did the performance anxiety begin, and also what negative experiences happen from there. In addition to that, we actually work with how the person feels right before they go on stage, both as they imagine it and sometimes literally off stage. In coming into life, after breathing and digesting, the human being, the newborn, needs to attach to her or his mother or caretaker, okay, which is a dance between, again, the two people. And literally what they need is, we'll say, a mother who is present, who's tuned in, who knows really what that newborn and then that baby needs as, weeks and months go by, and is able to just help them to form this basic human attachment. And it starts as a physical attachment, but it's also a personal, emotional attachment. Unfortunately, many people in the early stages of life do not get this consistent kind of attachment experience with their mothers. And it's not because they're bad or they're doing anything wrong. It's just that there are certain limitations that they have, difficulties they have with being attuned in a present sort of way for their baby. Who knows, they may have depression, they may have 3 other children, they may have economic crises, family crises. But what happens is, if you don't have this attachment, you're not able to take it in and then gradually develop in such a way that you feel like that you can be there for yourself and take care of yourself, which happens year by year by year and into adulthood. As far as dissociation goes, that really goes to more the profound traumas that people have early and often in life, and the worst ones are child abuse and sexual abuse and the worst versions of this. And unfortunately, much more of that goes on than we know or even want to know. People who have been exposed to this early and often in their lives, what happens is that the human brain, in order to survive, a part of the brain will sacrifice itself and will encapsulate that traumatic experience and hold it off from the rest of the brain. And literally, it can be more than one area that encapsulates it. And what happens is those traumatic experiences are held in those areas of the brain without the access to the rest of the person's brain and to themselves. Many people grow up and they forget about the fact consciously of the horrible things that happen to them, although it's affecting them without knowing it. We call this dissociation, which means that a person dissociates from part of themselves and part of their experiences. It's not done with any conscious awareness. It's not done by intention. It's done in order to survive. And you'll see people who have horrible histories who are able to go out there and function in ways that would seem impossible. It's because of the adaptive nature of dissociation to preserve for a person the rest of their experience and the rest of the sense of themselves and really the world. But the problem is, when somebody is dissociated like that, you can't get to those parts of them in order to help them to heal. And those barriers, those dissociative barriers, are meant to protect the person and the rest of their brain from being flooded or overwhelmed by that which is terrifying or painful. In this context, if you have a therapeutic approach that goes there and breaks through that barrier, but we do it in such a way that they don't get overwhelmed, and we do it in such a way that they can begin to heal so that ultimately they can face it. When it comes to pain and medical problems, the most important thing is that a person be fully medically checked out and medically treated. Okay? So brain spotting doesn't replace anything. It's not meant to replace. It's meant to augment whatever the pain is and the conditions that are causing the pain. The way we use brain spotting with pain is the fact that we don't separate out psychology and physiology. We don't separate out, emotional experiences and physical experiences. We know that physical pain creates emotional pain. We know that emotional pain creates physical pain, and it's all in the integrated circuit that is known as the nervous system. So because of that, we're already ahead of the game. Okay. Now, with a pain condition, again, we can approach it in a simpler way or a more complex way. We can literally find a brain spot that goes along with the pain, which can help to process it down. You have to be careful because sometimes it actually can exacerbate the pain. When that's the case, in the face of the pain, you try to find where the person, again, feels the calmest or most grounded, or their body resource. But we also work with where the pain came from. If it came from a sports injury or a car accident or surgery, then we'll go back to the original source of it, which really is a trauma in itself, emotional and physical trauma together, that gets locked in the nervous system. And we'll find the brain spot that goes along with the original trauma and the original experiences that led to the pain or where the pain started. Oftentimes, the brain will then follow its own pathways and explore and go back and recover its tracks, and then come back and process it through again. Just doing that oftentimes reduces the pain. In talking about people who have histories of early trauma and people who have, attachment issues and dissociation issues, a lot of the times the pain comes from that the traumas, the horrible experiences that are encapsulated in those areas of the brain that get expressed through body pain or body tension that sometimes can seem intractable or incurable. So again, there you're working together with those profound traumatic experiences and dissociative processes at the same time as working with the body pain. Basically, we don't approach anything just one way. We tailor it for the individual, and we make modifications as we go along. Because there's so much of a connection between the emotional and the physical, we look to enter the system and see where it goes, a lot of the times because the brain is wired for healing. Once you enter the pathway in, it covers both the psychological pain and the physical pain. Well, my question is, why would you not want to become a brain spotting therapist? And that may seem like I'm being not so serious, but I'm being actually very serious. It is the responsibility of every therapist to provide the best services they can for each client all the time. The human system, like I said, is so vast that there's not just one approach that covers all the bases. Because brain spotting is cutting-edge and brain-based and also well-developed within the psychotherapy relationship, it allows a therapist to do whatever they were doing before, but do it better and do it with more focus. And you don't have to go back to medical school to study neuroanatomy, because we're working with the most powerful, profound, self-healing mechanism, which is the brain itself. Okay? A therapist who learns brain spotting will be able to help the person's brain and nervous system to find where the problem is, to focus on it, and hold it in place until it resolves itself. As far as I know, there's no other technical approach that does this in this way or does this as effectively as brain spotting does.